Hey, this video is mostly spoiler-free for Black Panther Wakanda Forever, except for a segment towards the end, which I'll clearly mark. So, the MCU gets a lot of flack, and a good deal of that is warranted, but come on, we all know the internet has a tendency toward hyperbolic negativity. Not everything about this franchise is bad. In fact, some parts are good. And I think one of those things is Wakanda. I don't just mean the design, the music, the vibrance, the authenticity of the aesthetics. Other people have broken that down plenty, doubtless way better than I ever could. I mean the way the MCU gives Wakanda agency, gives Wakanda power in this setting and in these stories. Because to be honest, when we're thinking about the history of Marvel adaptations featuring Wakanda, that really isn't the norm. So that's what this video is about, how Wakanda and her position in this world has been depicted in the last 30 or so years of Marvel adaptations, and the main reason I think the MCU's version clears easily. Oh, and just FYI, some of these older projects aren't exactly readily available online, so not all of the footage is gonna be HD. I've done my best to find non-potato quality sources, but that hasn't always been possible. Anyway though, let's rewind. T'Challa's first voyage from print to screen landed the character in Marvel's mid-90s cartoon slate, their first attempt at a shared cinematic or televisual universe, with Wakanda first appearing in Season 2, Episode 7 of the Fantastic Four show.
By the time you awaken, the hunt will be over, and the Black Panther shall have won his greatest victory.
It's mostly a pretty straight adaptation of T'Challa's comic book origin, in the pages of Fantastic Four issues 52 and 53. In that story, T'Challa, the Black Panther, lures the Four to the land of the Wakandas, which is mostly just the stereotypical tribal village next to a fairly odd mechanical jungle. The Panther manages to defeat the Four one by one, trapping them as he does, but by the time he's defeated Reed, the others have managed to wriggle free. In the comics, it's because Johnny's college roommate Wyatt Wingfoot, who came along for some reason, sprung them, and in the 90s show, it's that Reed had freed Johnny while T'Challa was busy with Sue and Ben. Defeated, the Panther reveals his plan, getting the heroes to Wakanda to test his skill against theirs, to see if he was strong enough to avenge his father. You see, when T'Challa was a kid, an outsider named Claw had come seeking the rare, expensive vibranium that lay on Wakandan lands. Chief T'Chaka tried to stop them, but was slain in the process. Little T'Challa manages to drive off Claw though, for now. Ever since, he's been aware that the villain would return one day, and to this end, T'Challa had been training, aided by the technology he'd developed and the external education he'd received, both funded by sales of vibranium to the outside world. Turns out Claw's back now though, using his funny sound technology to attack Wakanda, create animalistic sonic automatons, and so on. Naturally, he's defeated before long. In the comics, mainly by T'Challa. I think this one panel here sums up the tone of how things shake out on the page, but that's not how things go in the cartoon. No, there, Reed saves the day, not single-handedly, but he's the first to realize that the team's vibranium bracelets can absorb Claw's energy. So we don't get a moment like the above, where T'Challa's strength and skill are emphasized, are able to strike the crucial blow, and as a result, T'Challa's, Wakanda's role in defending the land, in avenging the chief, becomes an awfully passive one. The main impact the Panther has here is accidental. He's got no idea that the vibranium bracelets he gives to the team will come in clutch. That isn't the only divergence from the original story made by this show though. While the Wakandas of page and screen are broadly similar, the show's village is a pretty standard American cartoon African village stereotype, but the comic went out of its way to show a level of technological integration throughout. There's even a moment where we see the Fantastic Four remark upon this blending of tradition and innovation. We see bright, vivid patterns next to machines and electronics. This is a Stan Lee/Jack Kirby book, but despite that, whiteness, there's a spirit to all this which resembles a sort of Afrofuturism. Perhaps it's a milquetoast, inauthentic version of it, but it is kind of there. And that isn't nearly as true in the 90s show. Look, even in the comics contemporary to this show's release, Wakanda was hardly the hyper-advanced, proud nation we'd think of today, but especially for the time, there was something a bit subversive about Wakanda, about T'Challa, in their introductory story. The way they seem more advanced than super genius Reed Richards, the way that the stereotypical African village design was combined with cutting-edge electronics, the way Wakanda's ruler is the one with the know-how and guts to take out Claw. Sure, Wakanda is cast as the vulnerable victim to a European colonial figure, but at the end of the day, Wakanda fixes Wakanda's problem. Wakanda has agency here, but a lot of that is lost in Wakanda's first on-screen appearance. And you could turn around and say, well, it's a Fantastic Four show. It makes sense to give them a more prominent, more active role in the story. But that first story was in a Fantastic Four comic too, and Lee and Kirby weren't afraid to give T'Challa the con. This episode isn't all bad. For one, it's got Keith David playing T'Challa, which is very cool, but in terms of how it differentiates this setting, or the role it gives Wakanda and T'Challa in the Marvel Universe, it feels like a step backward, even when compared to a borderline dicey comic from the 60s. But I said T'Challa appeared across this shared universe, right? Well, what about those other appearances? Apparently he has a background cameo in an episode of that 90s X-Men show, and I nearly couldn't even find it, but here it is. Pretty impactful stuff, huh? That was sarcasm, by the way. I also watched the first episode of that extremely 90s Avengers show because apparently he featured in that, but as far as I can tell, this is what the fan wiki counts as an appearance. Can you see him? Yep, on the poster, behind Bizarro Hawkeye's head. So yeah, the only real appearance T'Challa had in this animated universe was that Fantastic Four episode, which clung impressively close to his two-part comic origin, then nearly 30 years old, only really altering that story to make Wakanda less advanced, less unique, and to give the big game-winning play to Reed instead of T'Challa. Well, what comes next? In terms of adaptation more widely, it's probably the Ultimates comics, which do include Wakanda and Black Panther, but whose version of this corner of the Marvel Universe isn't exactly fantastic. Black Panther can't talk, he's maybe a mutant, and he's got a lot more to do with the Weapon X program and S.H.I.E.L.D. than he does with Africa. I'm not going to dwell on this, partially because it's just a parallel print version of the character, albeit a significant one, not an adaptation of the character to a different medium, which is the focus of the rest of this video, and partially because I just don't really want to talk about this fairly uninteresting take on Wakanda. But broadly, it fits the pattern we're discussing here. Wakanda, T'Chaka and T'Challa are acted upon by the world. They don't drive change, they react to it. The US is more advanced, so T'Chaka has to break tradition, reach out and beg them to save his son, which they do, before implanting him with metal claws for some reason, and refusing to let him return home. If we're being generous, there's a point being made here about US imperialism, which, yeah, nice, but in making this point, Earth 1610 sort of just reduced Wakanda to playing the kind of subaltern role, which most interesting takes on the setting, especially nowadays, reject utterly as their starting point. No, the next on-screen adaptation is to be found in Ultimate Avengers 2, Rise of the Panther. This was a Marvel animated feature from the mid-2000s, and we've talked about some of those before, but unlike, say, Thor Tales of Asgard, this one isn't good, really. I have no idea if that's a hot take or not, but Ultimate Avengers 2 is a fairly poor film. I don't just mean technically, though yes, also technically, but there's some really tepid writing, dreary pacing, and lifeless performances on display here, and this kind of bland vibe also extends to Wakanda, the setting for a big-ish chunk of the film. Now, it's worth noting that, unlike what the name would suggest, the Ultimate Avengers films aren't really direct adaptations of the Ultimates comics, especially this second one, so we don't get Weapon X T'Challa, any of that, but we do get another story where the Panther's forced to seek Western help because a European-ish bloke who possesses special powers and is linked to those World War II era baddies whose name YouTube won't like me saying is trying to nick their vibranium. Previously, of course, that's been Claw, and here it's Herkleiser, leading the Chitauri. Don't ask. That's how it starts, but then things go differently. T'Challa goes to the Avengers for help, and upon realizing he's the new king, Nick Fury immediately tries to get him to open Wakanda's borders. He refuses, but our heroes, the Avengers, in this universe even more explicitly an American paramilitary squad, bust in anyway under the radar. They're uninvited, but they say they're here to help as they fight back against the nation's totally unaware defenders. We learn that in this story, Wakanda's insularity is a response to a previous, nearly successful Chitauri attempt to conquer their lands and take their vibranium. As a result, the Wakandans turned inward, focused on themselves and focused on protecting their land, their way of life. This seems metaphorical, right? The Chitauri as European colonists? Well, you'd think so, but if that is the case, the way this film's story ends sends some mixed messages. The Chitauri come back, pretty much destroying Wakanda before being stopped themselves, mostly by the Avengers, again a team of US-affiliated super operatives who repeatedly invaded Wakanda's borders against T'Challa's wishes. So the film ends with Wakanda and her resources now known by America, and arguably in her debt. Wonder how that's gonna shake out. If we do try and preserve that fragile sense of metaphor, what does this mean? European colonialism bad, but Western neo-colonialism good? Let's not forget the oily smash and grab going on a little to Wakanda's northeast, happening in real life at the time of this film's production. Trying to read this film through this lens just gets bleak, so to be honest, I'm not even remotely sure Ultimate Avengers 2 was aware of any of these colonial dynamics to begin with. So let's refocus. Let's just think again about this idea of Wakandan agency. Ultimate Avengers 2 is more complex in this regard, I think, than the Fantastic Four episode was, maybe even more than the Ultimates comics were, because while we do inhabit the Wakandan perspective, while T'Challa and the others do take action, make choices, in terms of what actually ends up happening, in terms of how the story shakes out, their choices never seem to be worth as much as the choices made by the Avengers or by Fury. There's probably some parallel timeline to ours, where a version of this film exists in which T'Challa's, Wakanda's choices have more weight, where the Avengers stay out, and that movie probably sees T'Challa go up against the traditional isolationist Wakandan Council on the one hand, and S.H.I.E.L.D. on the other, to figure out a way to cooperate with the world against the Chitauri on their own terms. I'd be really interested in seeing a version like that, but as it stands, while this film does give us a more aesthetically and socially interesting Wakandan setting than we'd seen before, what doesn't change is the way Wakanda is still subordinated, both in the story itself and in the way the story operates. Wakanda still doesn't have real power here, geopolitically or narratively, and remains little more than a backdrop for the stories of other characters to play out in front of. Luckily though, after this point, that's when things start to get a bit better. We are going to have to skip forward a few years, because as far as I'm aware, nothing Wakanda related pops up in Fantastic Four World's Greatest Heroes, and while a version of the setting does feature in those Marvel vs. Capcom games, it's fused together with some Capcom setting. It's a whole thing. For the next proper look at this elusive nation then, we're looking towards Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the show that needs no introduction. Unless you're new here, in which case it probably does need one, so in a nutshell, this is a good show. Widely faithful to the spirit of Bronze Age Marvel, but unafraid to make changes to dated or iffy elements. That being said, my take on this Wakanda within the context of the stuff we've been talking about here is a little more mixed, because at least for the first few episodes in which we see T'Challa and his homeland, some of the patterns we've seen above persist. T'Chaka is killed by Claw and Hydra, indirectly this time, to establish access to the Vibranium Mound. T'Challa leaves and challenges the Avengers, doing some real damage until he convinces them to come along and help him overthrow the Wakandan government, led by Man-Ape. So they do, fighting the Wakandan defenders. Again, Wakanda is fashioned as a passive force, a weak state that resource-hungry outsiders are able to act upon. It's only due to the Avengers' attack that the neo-colonial Hydra retreats.
All ships, take whatever vibranium you have and launch. Hydra's pulling out.
And neo-colonialism is what's being evoked here. Let's think about that phrasing too. Hydra's pulling out. To me, that's suggestive of occupation, resource extraction, not conquering, not annexation or colonialism in the traditional sense. Pulling out is euphemistic, clinical. It's the language of 21st century warfare and subterfuge. This is a decidedly post-Bush Wakanda story, one that seems aware of its own implications in a way that Ultimate Avengers 2 didn't. Wakanda becomes a theater, a proxy for S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers' war against Hydra. The real victims here, of course, are the Wakandans. T'Chaka felled by M'Baku's Hydra-sourced stun device, those defenders injured in the episode's conquest, and of course the whole nation, having had their natural resources stolen. I like the ideas this version of the story's hinting at, but I don't like the way Wakanda is subordinated, made the plaything of the story's Western forces in order to tell this story. Do this in any other setting and I'm on board, but Wakanda should be more than this. You might think my standards here are anachronistic, that I'm looking at what Wakanda is now, in the comics, in the MCU, in the popular consciousness, a hyper-advanced, powerful, proud, never-colonized Afrofuturist state, and that I'm unfairly judging past takes on the material against this. And while it's true that the Wakanda of today is the product of a series of retcons, those retcons were largely just the logical extension of elements present from the start. Way back in Fantastic Four issue 53, we learnt Wakanda was, as of the 1960s, a yet unconquered, yet uncolonized land unthinkably rich with resources invaluable to the outside world, to the point that T'Challa was able to become one of the richest men alive by selling only small amounts. How is it possible, until Claw came knocking with his prototype sound technology, that Wakanda had escaped colonial clutches, escaped the scramble for Africa? It's from this question, I think, that a lot of the now familiar aspects of Black Panther lore emerged. And this is a question provoked by that very first appearance. The idea that Wakanda isn't just another place to be conquered, to be exploited, is baked into its DNA, and from the start, it and its inhabitants have been exceptional. The version of Wakanda we see in Earth's Mightiest Heroes is probably the best adaptation we'd seen by that point. Figuring Claw and Hydra as the shadowy backers of M'Baku's coup involves Wakanda and Wakandans more in their own story than a straightforward invasion would. The show's vision of Wakanda is aesthetically its own thing, far from the stereotypical African village theme we'd seen before, and the show makes it very clear just how technologically advanced Wakanda is.
For an uncharted African nation, they've got tech that's decades ahead of anything we've got. If Hydra gets their hands on any of this...
At least to begin with, though, the fundamental issues we'd seen previously are still present. Man-ape is involved, sure, but ultimately he's a pawn of Hydra. And Hydra, the toxic, resource-stealing outsiders, are only really chased out by the Avengers, not the Panther. Wakanda is still a place whose story is determined by the actions of others, a theater for outside powers to wage their wars through. Wakanda's place in its own story is still a fundamentally passive one. That's how it begins, anyway. But then something happens.
Outsiders may have threatened Wakanda, but outsiders saved us as well. The old ways allowed man-ape to do this, and the old ways must change. My first order as king is to let the council lead Wakanda. A council of the people. We can no longer hide ourselves away, waiting for our enemies to come to us. What happens in Wakanda affects the world, so I will go out into the world. I will fight alongside our new allies.
I'm not going to try and judge this quote-unquote modernization, this rejection of the old ways in favor of a seemingly democratic, seemingly Western alternative. That feels like a pretty loaded development. What I am going to talk about, though, is that this sequence finds T'Challa dictating the status of Wakanda's existence, its place in the world, on his own terms, and choosing to join the Avengers. There's no offer made. He decides it's what he wants, that it would help his people, and the team accepts. The earlier passivity is rejected by the episode's close, and the rest of the show follows through, because unlike all the stuff we've talked about so far, we see Wakanda and T'Challa more than once. We return to Wakanda a few times. For instance, it becomes the battleground upon which a battalion of Skrulls is defeated during the Secret Invasion arc. They get wasted, thanks largely to Wakanda's advanced defenses, and Wakanda manages better than most places to repel the alien threat. Following this, Wakanda extends an offer to the Avengers to fix Captain America's shield. Of course, being the Avengers, they unknowingly bring some conflict with them in the shape of the Vision, but the way this whole situation plays out, and to a point, the future of the Vision, these were both ultimately determined by Wakanda. Finally, Wakanda has power. Wakanda has agency. Now, that first appearance was, like so many of these adaptations, riffing on the general structure of Wakanda's first appearance. Wakanda's beset by vibranium thieves, so T'Challa seeks some form of aid from the outside. And this, I think, points to one of the ways that comic book accuracy as a concept is a mixed bag when it comes to adaptation. Most of these versions of T'Challa, of Wakanda, have adapted that original story to a greater or lesser extent. T'Challa hunting down outsiders outsiders to help in some way turf out other outsiders who are trying to nick their resources. And since none of these have been dedicated Black Panther projects, most of the time that's all we've seen happen with this setting. Claw, Kaiser, Hydra infiltrate and attack Wakanda again and again. Over and over, we get the pantomime of T'Challa hunting down heroes who eventually end up expelling the would-be vibranium thieves themselves. And that's mostly all we get until the next reboot, the next adaptation, in which the story plays out again. Because they're all taking as the Wakandan Urtext, an increasingly outdated story created by white dudes in the 60s, the history of Wakandan adaptation has seen the nation subordinated over and over for decades. And look, I'm not trying to cancel any of these versions or the original story. I'm sure there's positive, interesting aspects to all of these that I've not gone into, but what I am saying is that they're products of their times. And as more time passes, as Wakanda and what it represents continues to evolve, these older versions may well become somewhat unsatisfactory to modern readers or viewers. That's just how time works. The Wakanda of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, then, is by no means the definitive Wakanda of our times. It works in a lot of ways, but it's kind of also, initially at least, another example of that same subordinating pattern. However, even if it's not able to slough off all that gunk, this is the on-screen version of Wakanda, I feel, that begins to do justice to the concept, and begins to use the setting in ways only Wakanda could have been used. Ways where you get a sense of their power, authority, their scientific advancement, and their uniqueness. And maybe in that way it was a harbinger of things to come, because about a year after the last episode of Earth's Mightiest Heroes aired, a live-action Black Panther film was finally announced. And 2 years later, we got our first glimpse in Captain America Civil War of the MCU's Black Panther, and of this latest take on the Wakandan nation. Yes, I'll grant that aspects of this, of the MCU's take on Wakanda of the Black Panther films, are flawed. T'Challa probably should have played a more active role in his own film. Some of the jokes fall very flat, the CGI is fairly dire at points, I've spoken before about the kind of hollow way the film undermines its own more radical ideas, etc., but there is some real success here. And again, I'm not talking about the aesthetics, the amazing score, the vibrant, vivid vision of Afrofuturism, uniting tradition and innovation on every front from costuming to urban design. That's not what I'm talking about here, but plenty of others have in the past, and I'll link some of these discussions in the description below. No, I'm talking about what we've been discussing all throughout this video. Wakanda's place in the world, in the story, Wakandan power, Wakandan agency. Because the MCU delivers here in a big way. The Wakandan nation, the Wakandan people, their future isn't determined by outside forces acting upon them. The actions of the outside world absolutely play a role, a major one, in Wakanda's purpose and identity, but finally, we're not introduced to this place as some beleaguered, exploited realm needing Western aid. To demonstrate what I mean, let's break down Black Panther's and Wakanda's appearances across this franchise. The first time Wakandans come into play is during Civil War. A group of Wakandan civilians are caught up in the conflict between the Avengers and Crossbones and regrettably incinerated as Wanda fails to properly redirect an explosion. Following this, King T'Chaka comes out strongly in favor of the Sokovia Accords. You might think this sinks my argument, that once again we're seeing Wakandans in the firing lines, collateral damage in external conflicts, but I don't think that's the case here, not really. You see, the deceased Wakandans in Lagos were there on an outreach mission.
The traditionally reclusive Wakandans were on an outreach mission in Lagos when the attack occurred.
This isn't the passive, targeted Wakanda we've seen so much. This is a Wakanda that chooses to act upon the larger world. In stepping out from the safety of Wakanda, these outreach workers were unfortunate enough to get caught up in an unrelated crossfire. This is what pulls Wakanda into the fray, but it's not some targeted, subordinating attack. It's just an unfortunate consequence of a choice Wakanda made. That sort of continues throughout Civil War. Following up on this, T'Chaka goes to the UN and is killed alongside plenty of others during Zemo's bombing. Again, T'Chaka wasn't the target here, not really. Zemo's scheme has very little to do with him, so when T'Challa dons the suit, comes out in pursuit of Bucky, gets all mixed up in the plot, that's also a consequence of Wakanda's actions, T'Chaka's actions, T'Challa's actions too. In terms of agency, Civil War's a fairly multipolar film. There's a lot of different actors, all making different choices, all taking action, and eventually all of these forces coincide. But I think it's fair to say that some of the movie's biggest moments are a direct result of Wakandan agency. Looking forward to the Black Panther solo film, the same pattern rings true. While Claw and his vibranium theft do play an important role in the film, we find out that in the grand scheme of things, he's nothing more than a pawn in Killmonger's plans. Killmonger, of course, is the film's main villain, and while he is half American, while he is an ex-CIA operative, his existence, his identity issues, his whole motivation for doing what he does, these are all direct consequences of Wakanda's and T'Chaka's actions. When things get messy following Killmonger's entry, it isn't because outside powers are acting on Wakanda, it's because of the willpower, the agency of various factions and figures within the country, past and present. And that criticism of the film I referenced above, the idea that T'Challa's too passive, too reactive in his own film, that may well be true, but even if it is, that just goes to show how much power the rest of this cast has, how much agency Wakanda as a whole possesses here, in stark contrast to so many of those previous adaptations. This, finally, is a story of Wakandan problems and Wakandan solutions. It might seem like Infinity War doesn't provide much material for analysis on this front, since Wakanda plays a relatively minor role in that massive interstellar event, but I do think there's one major point worth making here. For one, while as in that Ultimate Avengers film, Wakanda is the site of an alien attack, here that's a choice. Similarly, while the Avengers also enter the kingdom here, it's by invitation. The Avengers can only enter, can only bring Vision and the fight to Wakanda with the King's permission.
Seems like I'm always thanking you for something. What are you doing?
What we see here then, knowingly or not, inverts the type of story we saw in Ultimate Avengers 2. This time the Avengers are invited in. This time the alien attack is on their terms. It's good to see that whoever has the reins, the Russo brothers or Ryan Coogler, this agency, this key aspect of MCU Wakanda is recognized and retained. I think that's good. Because I'm not constantly critical of it, I get a fair few commenters accusing me of being some mindlessly enthusiastic MCU fanboy. So I will just say, if for some reason you want to see me being more negative about the MCU, hey, feel free to go back and watch any of these videos on screen now, or wait for the No Way Home video I'm hoping to get out sometime next month. But yeah, one thing I try to do on this channel is give credit where credit's due, and I think the way these films have brought Wakanda to life is absolutely one of those moments, especially when compared to that nation's on-screen history of adaptation. Again, I'm not saying that all the previous versions we've looked at are problematic or even bad, because they take a different approach to this setting, to these characters, but I am saying I think this one is way better. And that isn't just for what the idiots among you might term woke reasons. No, isn't it just logical that the people of the most advanced, least known nation on the planet, apart from, I guess, spoiler for Black Panther 2, wouldn't be laid low by outsiders, wouldn't constantly be a passive force acted upon by external powers, but would more often than not be the ones making the moves in their own stories? Thinking about world building, characters, and storylines, the Wakanda of the comics, especially the Wakanda of recent comics, sure, that's probably still better, deeper than that of the films, but that's sort of inevitable unless this Black Panther franchise continues for decades. And having just spent ages slogging through the mire of all these older Black Panther adaptations, I think I can appreciate more than ever the fact that Ryan Coogler and Chadwick Boseman's take on the world of T'Challa is a really good one. And sure, some of that quality probably comes from the gargantuan Disney budget, but a lot of it comes from visionary, passionate, and experienced creatives who were devoted to making sure Wakanda didn't just feel like a backdrop in this world, but felt real, authentic, powerful, and active. And this new film doubles down on that in a big way. Wakanda Forever spoilers. This is the Wakanda Forever section. If you haven't seen the film, skip to the timecode on screen now. This has been the Wakanda Forever spoiler warning. So, Let's talk about how this sense of Wakandan agency is preserved in the new film. To begin with, the initial conflict of the film, the international struggle for vibranium which sets Wakanda against the world and drags Talokan into the mix, that is a direct consequence of T'Challa's choice at the end of the first movie.
For the first time in our history, we will be sharing our knowledge and resources with the outside world.
The US makes the decision to scour the seas for vibranium, Namor makes the decision to defend it, and things shake out from there. But this whole situation, the complexities, the politics, the violence of Wakanda Forever, the only reason our characters have to face these struggles, have to make these hard choices, is the Wakandan decision to reveal their nation and their technologies to the world. After this point, things get a lot messier. This sequel is a lot more geopolitically minded than the first film, and the specter of the CIA, of American imperialism, looms large behind the film's events. So a lot of what Shuri, Ramonda, and the others are doing here is broadly outmaneuvering the US. But while America is a threat to Wakanda here, I think the reverse is also true. What else can the American paranoia tell us than that on some level, the US fears Wakanda? That this kingdom's power and active role within this world is recognized by all, even the ostensibly hegemonic US. Talokan, too, takes a fairly active role in the narrative, with much of this film seeing a sort of tit-for-tat exchange between both of these hidden kingdoms. I think that's good. A lot of the reasoning for why I like this sense of Wakandan agency also applies to Talokan, but it is worth noting that in the end, Wakanda wins out. And not just Wakanda, but that spirit of optimism, of cooperation, of mutual aid that drove T'Challa's Wakanda. Wakanda still would have won out, technically, at least within this narrative, if Shuri had just shish kebabbed Namor at the film's end, but the decision she makes, the mercy, the alliance, that isn't just a victory. That's a victory which preserves the ideals of this Wakanda. So Wakandan agency is important to Wakanda Forever, but it appears that what's most important here isn't the mere ability to choose. It's the ability to make the right choice. In stepping out into this messy world, this morally grey world, Wakanda nearly got ground down, nearly became just another nation-state with bloody hands. But Wakanda Forever sees them win, without stooping to this level. To me, that shows the MCU continuing to do justice to this setting, and to these characters. Admittedly, that's a relatively shallow dip into Wakanda Forever, what it's saying about nationhood, principles, imperialism, and so on. There's a lot of crucial questions I've not touched here, around the role of Everett Ross, around just how villainous Namor really is, but in terms of Wakanda's active role in this world, in these narratives, I think I've hit on the key points. I do have thoughts on the rest of it, and I'm sure some of you will be disappointed that this, my long Wakanda-themed video coinciding with the film's release, isn't more focused on Wakanda Forever specifically, but here's the thing. There's a paradox when it comes to the way YouTube works for channels like mine around the demand for new themed content. A new thing happens, in this case a Marvel movie, in this case the Black Panther sequel, and so many people are interested in this new thing, searching for it, more likely to click on it, that you're essentially leaving clicks, engagement, money on the table if you don't come out with some themed content. And the sooner you come out with your Black Panther 2 video, the more benefit you'll see from it. In a sense, you're incentivized not to take your time, not to sit with your thoughts, not to reflect, and just to create. And that results in a sort of tension with something like Wakanda Forever, which is a relatively complex film, and whose complexities are weighty and charged. I guess what I'm trying to say with all of this is that maybe I will make another long video, focused solely on Wakanda Forever, getting to grips with it on a thematic level. This video isn't necessarily instead of that one, but if that does come out, it might not be for a while, because I wouldn't want to rush it, and I wouldn't want to mess it up. That being said, I am planning to make a shorter Wakanda Forever video as next month's Patreon exclusive about one criticism I have of the film's finale and one direction the film could have gone to solve this. So if that sounds like your idea of a good time, make sure you're signed up to the Pillar of Garbage Patreon page. Any tier will do, and you'll be able to feast your eyes on that juicy content nugget when it comes out. But that's about it for our journey through the history of Wakanda on screen, and for my defense of this aspect of the MCU. As always, please do let me know what you thought about it in the comments below, and drop a like if you feel like it. Big thanks to all of you watching, and special shoutouts to all my patrons on screen now, especially Strange Folk. See you later.